but it's a very important topic to us. It's two kind of very different things. One, I'm going to talk a little bit about the assignment grid that we started telling you about in concept the last summit, for those of you that were here, and sort of rolled out last year, and now we're looking at some of the things we've discovered, from that. And then I'm going to finish with a little bit on our continuing education program that we have. There we go. So what I'm going to talk about essentially is for the assignment grid. I'm going to give you a little background on the rationale and some of the basic principles that went into the building of that grid. I'm going to kind of look at a couple of the grids anyway by discipline, but in no way, shape, or form am I going to go through it row by column, because that would be a long time. And then we're going to talk about some issues that have come up and look at, having done this for a year, what are we now thinking about? And this will be the point where, I'm hoping to get a lot of comments from you guys who may or may not even be aware of this and have tried to use it, and are also finding out some of the challenges yourself. And when I'm done with that topic, I'll go into continuing ed, and we'll talk a little bit about why we're doing it and the basic requirements. And I'll even throw in a little bit about how we think we're going to be able to track the continuing ed component. Okay. Why did we create this? Okay. We decided that a few years ago that we had some really interesting discrepancies across the country. Usually they're brought to our attention from one perspective or another. I've used this example a couple times, but in the same year, we did have a stage race for 5 categories. There were at least 100 people in each category. It was a 5-day stage race. This whole thing was run with 2 officials, with road stages on open roads and things like that. At the same time, we also had a cyclocross race with less than 90 participants all day long and a crew of 9 officials. I kind of would like to have swapped those crews. Probably would have been a better service to our membership if we had swapped the crews on that. But so in an attempt to create something that would start narrowing the gap, we came up with this concept. Another reason, we hope to give the local association essentially a tool for their part of the assignment process. We hope to give the race directors, in this point, one of the things we're doing is, at least, especially at our level here with staff, and hopefully from the National Technical Commission level and the RTC level, we're trying to involve the race directors a lot more in decision-making processes. One of the main things that is often lost is it is in fact not our race. It's the race director's race. Because of how long we've been doing this and how many bike races we've been to, some of us might have the assumption that when we walk on site, it now becomes our bike race, but nothing is more obvious than going to a really big race and seeing the really big checks that had to be cut to basically put that race on, and you get the idea that this is a product that somebody owns, and it is not us. So we have to keep that in mind, that we are performing a service for the racing community and for that race and for USA Cycling, but we don't own the race. And there's a lot of times when the race directors are not, they're not in the loop. We're hoping that this also gives race directors a guide, so that if they had a race that according to our table should have 2 officials, and they're suddenly having 11 officials dumped on them, they have a legitimate gripe about, well, what's going on? You're way off of your grid. And that's kind of the other aspect that we like to see it. I like to get those questions. Most of the time when I get the question, I would say, yeah, that is a really good question, and I will go back and talk to somebody that's making the assignments, and there's a really good answer. But that exercise in itself is exactly what we were looking for. Please, race directors, ask the question if you don't understand why you had so many or so few. And more often than not, it ends up not really being an issue, but we like the questions to be asked. This one probably, I could just put that in with the LA, but the officials assigners kind of need to have some basic idea of what we should be looking at for assignments. Part of the grid also tells where the assignments are coming from, because now we actually have 3 different groups depending on the level of the race. The lowest level of race is still always going to be the local association. As you get to a higher level race, you might have some input from the Regional Technical Commission, and a higher yet level race, you'll have some input from the National Technical Commission and myself. So that grid kind of gives you an idea of who's making assignments for specific things. And of course, trying to establish a minimum and maximum standard for the number of officials and to some extent the categories that we expect. In the old rule book, there used to be a table that said exactly what rank you had to be to work certain positions of certain level races. It was largely disregarded, I would say. And some of that's probably largely disregarded with the current one, but at least it's in there. The basic principles of all this, acceptable range of officials in numbers, minimum rank of officials. Again, none of these are etched in stone. What was it, Todd? You said they're etched in PowerPoint, not in stone. All these can be changed, but to be changed, we think it should at least involve some sort of dialogue and explanation as to why we're not, following it. Also based on the level of the event. Certainly, if you're talking about a national championship, it's a completely different model than if you're talking about a level E criterium or a level E mountain bike race. We try and build in some flexibility. Some's written in the policy itself. This is policy 4, if I remember correctly. To adjust to specific differences. Tells who makes the assignments, already did that. Engages the 3 major groups that are going to assign officials. LAs for most of them. Most people get most of their assignments from the LA. That will probably never change. There are far more local races than there are national championships. The RTC, which is kind of the new kid on the block for being a part of this, and we've had some growing pains getting traction with this and getting the procedures down, and we'll continue to improve that. And then the National Technical Commission, which has always been there doing the highest level of assignments, and now we're sort of figuring out where that transition from the NTC to the RTC ought to be for the assignment process. I'm going to say this a bunch of times, and this was in fact the fear when we came up with this, and I heard from our executives that they worried that if we put something down in writing, there would be plenty of people that would then say, this is the law, and they will never vary from it under any circumstances, and that's not what we wanted it to be. But we decided to go with it anyway because we think it's better to have something and make adjustments to it than to have nothing and just let people, do whatever they want with no guidance whatsoever. One of the other basic concepts is in a perfect world, every state would be of a certain size and would be separated from every other state by over 100 miles. And then it would be really easy to say that LA assignments ought to come from the officials in the LA, and there would be no reason to ever bring someone from another LA because you'd have to cross, this impassable barrier to the next state, and that would be overly expensive to do that. There are some states where that probably is a slam dunk. I mean, if you're stuck in the middle of Texas and you have officials in the middle of Texas and you put a bike race on in the middle of Texas, then it's probably a good idea to use the officials from the middle of Texas. And to take one from another state means you're essentially bringing them from what in Europe would have been 6 or 7 countries away. But of course, again, it's a guide, not a law, and there will be times, especially when you have smaller states stuck close together, when there would be a reason to vary from that. But basically, you like to see the LAs sort of looking out for their own. And at the regional level, the Regional Technical Commission would be looking at the officials from a region when they're making assignments. And of course, at the national level, we don't have any of those constrictions. We can just pick people from all over the nation because that's the point. We would like a national championship to have officials from all over, so it has a true, national flavor to it. Like I said, there are certainly valid reasons to vary from either of those two. Some of them we've already mentioned in passing. We'll talk a little bit more on at some point what the RTC does, and you guys will talk about it in breakout sessions, but We have sort of a cross-pollination plan where we want to move officials around. It's really good for an official to get out of their area and go see how the racing is run, how the officiating is done in other areas. Question is, who's supposed to pay for it? If I'm the race director, I'm not thinking this is such a good plan. If I go, oh, by the way, because it's going to be good for Steve Stone, we're going to send him to Northern California, and he's going to work a level C stage race, and you're going to pay for it, including his airfare and his hotel. And you might think, well, I'm all in favor of officials' education, but not to the expense of my pocketbook. And that becomes the issue we have to deal with. I would love to see people flying all over the country and working all over, and all the officials would be more homogeneous, and we'd get all the interpretations the same. But the reality is someone's got to pay the bill. Okay, why am I not going row by column? It's because this is the one of the grids. Basically, I just wanted to point out sort of when you look at one of these, what it is you're looking at. Okay, so what you're looking at, this is the road. You're looking at the positions that normally would be assigned for a certain level of races. In this column, you're looking about who's making the assignments. In this column, you're looking at how many officials you would have in that position, and in the parentheses, what their minimum rank would be. So for example, we're looking here at an international bike race. You're going to have a president, i.e. a chief referee. You're going to have one of those who's going to be an international commissaire and is appointed by the UCI. Then you can have members of the commissaires panel, how many, there's a range given, and whether it's an international or a national commissaire is going to depend on some subtleties like what level of race it is, because that will vary based on whether it's an HC or a 0.1 or a 0.2. As we come down, you'll have a chief judge. This one is appointed by the National Technical Commission. It has to be at least an A, for example. So all the grids have that same basic idea. And then over here, as we go down, we're going down theoretically anyway in the level of the race. So a national championship, an NRC race, any A race, B and C races, D and E races, and simply initially an attempt to come up with, like I say, more of a perfect world, what we would expect to see there. Probably haven't seen a bike race yet that really matched a perfect world, except maybe for a UCI race. I mean, it's pretty easy. And a national championship. I mean, we control the assignments for national championships. We can follow that grid pretty well, and we assign all the officials for international races, so we can pretty much control that. And it's a lot of it based on what the UCI requires for an international race. As we get farther and farther away, there starts to be much more variability. And the other things we're taking into account would be like how many racers are there in the event. A level E race with 1,000 participants really doesn't have that much difference of a need than a higher level race, because it's still a very complicated race with a lot of people, and it's going to have more officials than a level E race with 50 racers. The other thing we also take into account on this one might be the number of races on the course at one time. That certainly is going to change. So we have different columns and different numbers, and essentially between these two, we're looking at, you're going to go with the larger number. So you might have few racers but lots of starts. That's a different answer than few racers and few starts. So that tries to take all that into account. Whether it does a particularly good job or not is open to discussion. And then most of these grids have some caveats to them by the little asterisks that make some explanations on what we're expecting, when we might be expected to see some differences. So underlying principles behind that: more fields, more officials. Okay, that makes sense. And that actually, and I'll talk about that later, but that actually was one of the probably most painful parts of adopting this, and one of the biggest differences we saw around the country. There are some areas of the country, and Jim described, their situation. They were way ahead of this. In fact, they'd probably look at this grid and they'd go, "Really? That's it? We've been doing this for 20 years, and about time you caught up." Other areas are just the opposite. Other areas would almost be at the point where they'd be going, "What, you mean I have to have an official?" So there was kind of a sticker shock when we started asking the question, well, what do we think is appropriate in a road race? Is it appropriate to send a field of 50 guys out on an open road when you've told the police that there's going to be enforcement of a centerline rule and not send an official with them? Okay. Our basic philosophy is no, it's not appropriate to do that because, for one thing, if you don't send an official out, you don't have a centerline rule. And that's bad for multiple reasons. One, you're probably going to get somebody killed because they'll get hit by a car. Two, you just lied to the police officers when you told them you were going to enforce the center line if you don't have anyone out there to enforce it. And that ultimately creates a lot of angst with the police officers, which ultimately means you might not have that race next year. But there are plenty of places where it was not common to do that. In fact, it was common to send 10 fields of large numbers of riders out on open roads and have no official with them at all, or maybe one sort of circulating around. In some cases, oddly enough, we were aware of races where there were about 12 plus fields on the course at once, and there were in fact 12 officials at the race, but they're all sitting at the finish line, which is not that abnormal a model. I mean, it used to be a model in other places. The officials didn't actually travel with the race. They started the race, they drove to the finish line by a more direct route, they scored the race, and they figured whatever else happened out on the road would sort itself out. But we kind of didn't go that way with our philosophy. What we put in the grid was we like to see an official with each group unless the peloton is less than 20, because you probably aren't going to have much of a centerline issue if you have less than 20 people out there, in which case you might have one official for two groups and they can sort of float back and forth. That's the underlying principle, and that part, and the reason I put it in red, is that was the sticker shock when we adopted this to a lot of races. There's like, we were used to having just a handful of officials, and if I'm looking at this right, I need 15 more officials this year than I had last year, and that was extremely painful for race directors to bear when they hadn't really planned on it. I think that one's obvious. We have built in all the grids the concept of apprentices. Okay, so we love to see apprentice officials. Everyone that's made it to a NatCom level has certainly paid their dues, as we call it, and they've worked races for free, and they've gotten themselves places they wouldn't normally have been just to work some races. We kind of like to codify that a little bit and say that we approve of that. We approve of officials getting extra experience, but again, that becomes one of those questions of the race director who's in many disciplines and many levels of races, you know, probably lucky if he doesn't lose too much money by doing this. Does he want to pay for that experience? So part of the things that we've done, and you guys have all essentially paid for with your officials' license fees, especially the changes thereof the last couple of years, paid for a program, the whole RTC budget, where there's a lot of, not a lot, but there is some money to support mentoring of officials in apprentice positions. And we do that quite frequently. So the idea, we love to see apprentices, and other LAs have done it their own way. They put the apprentice official in, and the LA will pay it, and that's great. And I think no race director is going to argue, you know, against that. They get to have some more officials, and they're not having to pay the bill. That's a good thing for them. Already did that. Criterium. The grid for Criterium is a little bit simpler because Criteriums are a little bit simpler. So I'm going to touch briefly on some of the things that we're talking about. One of the questions that came up is, you know, what do you do with motorcycle officials? There are a lot of places that run crits without a motorcycle official. We like to see, you know, motors out there instead of cars. Cars in a Criterium can pose bigger problems than, you know, motorcycles being out there when you go around a corner and, you know, lose control of your vehicle. Also easier to work from a motorcycle, but that isn't always the case. But then how many? I mean, do we want to see a motor referee out there for a 17-hour day, you know, doing hundreds of laps? Eventually they're going to get tired. So we try and build in some flexibility for how many we would have. In a short day, you might only need one. In a long day, you probably need two. And a lot of times what happens is the motor referee alternates with the pit referee, so they're not on the bike the entire time. so they don't get too fatigued. If they get fatigued from two different things, not just one. They probably, after getting yelled at by a couple of riders that they denied free laps on, they want to get back on the bike and get out there where it's safe. The other questions that we're starting to look at are, how many judges do you need? And I will come back to that in a minute. Number of judges is going to vary based on complexity of the race and availability of technology. Hopefully everyone recognizes at this point that if the RD race director is paying for a timing company to come in, whether it's chips or photo finish, or in some cases both, they don't need as many people sitting up there with legal pads writing numbers down. And that is something we're taking a long look at right now. Of course, pit referee, that's going to vary in a criterium depending on the length of the course, how many pits you have, is it a single pit or a double pit? Already did that. Okay, so let's start looking at kind of what some of the issues were that we've seen this year, in the last year when we really rolled this out. One is there certainly are people that think the law is the law. They're going to use that grid to beat the race directors down and into submission, and they're going to assign more officials than that race might need because the grid didn't actually give that situation specifically. So they just looked at it and said, okay, this says you need 6 officials, you're going to get 6 officials. Maybe that race needed 6 officials, maybe it didn't. It should be a valid conversation to have, though. Not taking the nature of the race into account, or not involving the race director at all in the conversation. It's like, here you go, this is your official's crew. Don't bother to complain about it because I won't listen. We've seen several examples of that in the last year. I already mentioned the sticker shock. Last year they had 2, now they have 13. That's a real live example. Yeah, if you were the race director, that'd be a big sticker shock to you too. If you were used to having 16 fields of 100 out there and raking in $30 a head on entry fees and having essentially no officials bill, and now you're told your officials bill just went up by 7-fold essentially. That would be an issue. The other one, sorry. Where did I go here? Time, crit. That. Yeah. There we go. What the hell is an RTC? Since that was a new process, there were plenty of race directors that were not aware that it was bad communication on our part that they weren't. And one of the things that we're making some huge strides on, lately, especially since we have a staff person who is our race director certification manager, our communication with race directors is so much better than it has ever been. And it's just it's a blessing to have easy access to go, oh, well, who are the race directors for the NCC races? Oh, here they are. Boom, copy and paste, send something to all of them. It's really cool now. So hopefully we'll be getting them up to speed on what some of these processes are, and they won't ask questions like that anymore. This is a pretty interesting question, which actually came up fairly recently. A race director has a series, and from his perspective, they're all identical races. The courses are all within a few hundred meters of being the same. They all have one pit. And wanting to know why over the course of a season with all these races, the number of officials has varied from 5 to 8. Because it would seem like it's a fairly, homogeneous set of circumstances. You've got the same need for officials for a crit that's the same distance and everything, and he was asking an interesting question. But we have seen that, this year. And of course, the one we're hearing more and more all the time, why do I need judges? I have photo finish and chip timing, and it works really well. Okay, so that is one of those overarching questions we hear all the time, and I feel that a lot of us, and I'm certainly guilty of this myself, have looked at this question from a different perspective, and I'm changing my perspective as the number of years go by that we have technology and the technology gets better. But a lot of us, when we started doing this, the technology always failed. And then it failed quite frequently, and those of us that started working with chips when they first came out, it's like, what a nightmare. Every international commissar I know has had a nightmarish experience with somebody saying, well, I've got chip timing. And to the point where our initial gut reaction was, yeah, right. And we would want to see an officials crew there and assume it wasn't going to work. So one of the issues that we have, and one of the topics of our questions actually, is I think that when we created these grids, they all kind of have a worst case scenario focus to them. They're all kind of assuming that the race director is not going to have technology. That's why we might have a chief judge and 2 to 3 judges. Okay, well that's totally appropriate. If you've got no technology, then who else is going to judge the finish? You're going to need some judges to judge the finish and score the race and all that. It assumes technology will fail, and everyone knows at some point it's going to. The question we'll come back to is what we want to do with that when it does. Another subtlety is kind of like we put out this, and we say that this is your standard crew complement for a race. Your chief referee, judge, a couple judges, a pit referee, and 2 motos. Okay, and it's kind of like we've established a spot for an official, especially by saying something like, well, we got a place here for 2 motos. Okay, well, when we put these together, we sort of had in our mind what that race was going to look like. So this is, I believe, the NCC grid that we would have, what we would send out to say, this is the officials we're going to assign. So for what I have in my mind as an NCC race, this might be completely appropriate. Okay, but on the other hand, what if that NCC race is in fact only 3 starts? Pro men, pro women, and maybe 1 other race. Okay, well now, I probably don't need 2 motos. It's a short day. What if, the race had some other characteristic and now the race has chip timing that works and photo finish that works. Well, do I need a chief judge and 2 judges? What are these people going to be doing when really the technology is going to hand them the results probably faster than they can even write the last number down? Do we need that many? But what happens then is in the mindset of, well, this is what we established, so we've got these spaces here, and by God, we are going to put names next to those spaces. And, Ferengi rule of acquisition number 1, once you have the spaces, you never give it back. I think that's part of the subtlety that goes on the way when people think about these. Certainly, when we look at some of the other disciplines, I think the grid works better for certain disciplines than other. I think for the track, it might be overly ambitious. We have some issues with track that we're trying to address. A lot of track races don't sanction with us for various reasons. They might think our permit fees are too high, the insurance surcharges are too high, whatever. Track, there's not a lot of people in track. It's hard to make money as a track race director. They might just feel that if they permit with us, they're going to get way too many officials assigned. And in some cases, we have interesting situations where the race director really wants to be his own chief referee, even though to permit with us, essentially you can't. We have a rule that says the race director can't be the chief referee for what I hope is obvious reasons, but there's just too many conflicts of interest there. And while we work together with the race directors and we have to be colleagues and work with them, they do have a slightly different focus than officials do. And we kind of need the checks and balances of having somebody there that is looking at it from a more dispassionate view, who has no vested interest in the results other than that they come out correct, and who's going to take a look at the money flow. And otherwise, I've been here when we had situations where the race director sent in $1 instead of 3, and only sent it in for 1 day of a stage race instead of the other 4. Unfortunately, in that situation, I had the chief referee that actually collected the money and sent it in, and when asked, his only response was, oops. But that kind of thing happens. I do believe that in the grand scheme of the entire country, few track races are making money at this. So a perfect world officials assignment might mean the difference between the race director breaking even or only losing a few dollars to where he's still fine with the concept of doing this for the love of the sport, and losing so much money that he's like, I can't do this anymore, and so they'll sanction with somebody else who won't make them do that. A lot of times our perfect world officials crew is not matching reality on the track. So what we are looking at, and it's always the question, and we're in a sort of an official-centric group here, of course, so we tend to lean a little to one side, but from my perspective here, we have to balance everything. We have to balance fair and safe, which is our ultimate goal, and in many cases, both of those require more officials to accomplish that goal than other races might. But at the same time, we're also trying to balance how far do we push that before we don't have races permitted of USA Cycling at all, because it's become too burdensome financially to get that done. And that when you sit at a corporate office, you're sitting in there weighing those all the time. These are questions that are very current with us, especially as we try to get more traction in the mountain bike world, as we try to get more track races sanctioning with us. Those are big questions we're having to deal with. I'm not even going to go through the grid on that. I want to get on to my other topic as well. Mountain bike is specifically the most problematic right now, from my perspective anyway. There are very many mountain bike races that do not sanction with us. We would like to change that. There are some, I am sure, that do sanction with us that don't have any officials. And if they do, it's very likely the race director is being his own official, and no one has policed that well enough and pointed out that actually, you can't do that. That's happened this year because we've created some calendars and got a lot more races on our mountain bike calendars, and that's great. And then when I open the question up to the race director, well, let's talk about the officials assignments because you're now on our national calendar for cross-country races. Their response kind of is, officials? I've always been my official. Was I not supposed to be doing that? And well, sorry, the cat just got let out of the bag, but no, actually you weren't supposed to be doing that, and you never were supposed to have been doing that, but kind of where we're at right now. So again, sticker shock on their part to discover that they were supposed to have officials there when they hadn't in the past. We have situations where the race director has his own timing, starts his own race, finishes his own race, does his own results, a one-man show. Now the problem with that is when that works, and from their perspective it does, we get this question all the time, and it is a difficult one to answer. Well, we've been doing that for 10 years. It's not broke, why fix it? Why should I change and start paying people to come do what I've been doing, and we've had no problems with it? And if we'd had a problem with it, we would have heard about it by now, and in most cases, and these races seem to work quite well. So we're left sort of sitting there going, well, I've got a philosophical problem here, because philosophically, this could lead to this, which could lead to this, and that's bad. But I have a reality situation where there isn't a problem. All these philosophical problems have never happened in the history of that race, and now we're telling them, well, it's a new world. Welcome to the USA Cycling calendar. By the way, you just bought yourself another $1,000 in officials fees. Hope you don't mind. It's an issue for us right now. One of the my personal issue is because mountain biking is on a slightly different model, the local associations aren't involved. And I hope before I die, I see a day when mountain bike is like all the other disciplines, and we have a organization in the state that is being part of that, and I'd like it to be the same one that does all the other ones. We're way far away from that happening right now, but that's my dream. That'll be a great day. When that eventually happens, I'll be able to say my work here is done, and but we got a ways to go. And again, well, another thing I want to point out about this grid, which follows the same concepts, a lot of our races are over here in this column, and we get down to where we might only have 2 officials, there are still, in the mountain bike world, even that number, which to somebody in Mabraland is laughable, to them, to some mountain bike race directors, that is an insurmountable burden. If we're telling them they have to hire 2 officials and pay them, that is a big chunk of extra money they don't want to spend. And that's where we're getting the issue. Okay, I gotta move this along here. So basically what we're looking at, and it's actually something that everyone should be looking at, and it's a never-ending question. And really, the question is, what is our value proposition? What is it officials bring to the table? In some areas, we've been doing it so long, officials are so accepted for what they do, this question is never asked. Maybe it's only asked in very specific, what's the value proposition for one more official, but not the overall question of what's the point of having officials. But in other disciplines, that's not the case. They're still asking the question, why do we have them at all? We always are going to have, or more and more as technology gets better, we're going to have this question that we have to answer. Why do you need judges with legal pads when there are chips in photo finish? I recently received a video by one of the race directors who was asking this question of us. It was kind of interesting because it was a video from the back of a stage, and what it showed was, on the left side of the stage, a whole lot of blue shirts, and it focused in on what the blue shirts were doing, and they all had legal pads, and they were all writing strings of numbers down as the riders went by. And then it focused over here on the computer screen, where when the pack went by, it went, boom, here's your order, immediately. And then it took that all the way to the finish of the race. And the finish of the race, the riders went by, and the legal pads were still writing numbers down as far as they could with their eyes. And then it shifted over here, and boom, here's your results. And it printed out, and they were handing them over there. And while they were sitting there waiting until they got done to actually look at that and go, yeah, your results are right. But there's a situation where the technology was working the way it's supposed to be. The chips worked, the photo finish worked, and boom, 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 they had results in seconds, and had 3 people manually trying to duplicate that, whose work was probably never used because they didn't need it, okay? And that's the question we have to answer. Another question that we're talking about is, who is responsible for results? Where there's going to be a shift in, as technology is more accepted, and who that is. It always used to be the officials. Pet peeve I used to have when I got started is we had photo finish companies, and some of them really loved to kind of show off a little bit. So when things worked well, the photo finish guy was out there with his big sign with his company name on it and wearing his Merlin hat and results by magic, and everything was great. But when the camera didn't work, that person wasn't there with their sign anymore. They were pointing to the blue shirts over there and going, those guys didn't get the results. Okay, well, whose job is it? And there's going to be a movement more towards the race directors being responsible for the results portion of this, which is nothing new in other countries where quite frequently the results is a separate company and the officials really don't have anything to do with it. About all they have to do is sign off on the results when they're done. So the race directors can hire professional timing companies. If we carried this to one of the conclusions we could come to is if the race directors have to produce results and they become responsible for those results, how are they going to do it? Well, they can hire a professional timing company. A lot of them will. They could do it themselves. They could hire officials to do it for them and sit there with legal pads writing numbers down if that's how they want to do it. But if the shift ends up being the race directors responsible for the results, especially in those circumstances, then their argument of why do I need judges when I have technology is going to become much more valid. My question to myself, and where we discuss more in the events department, is it time for us to stop thinking worst case scenario? Okay, I draw this as sort of an analogy I used to say all the time after 9/11. I really hate the fact that for the rest of my life, I have to go through TSA and go through all this hassle, where I would like to take the chance the 1 in a billion chance that someone blows my airplane up. I'll take that. I'll take those odds, okay? A lot of race directors would probably say, okay, granted, every once in a while the technology is going to fail. Maybe we should just let them eat that risk themselves and stop assigning officials on the assumption that it's going to fail. And if it does fail, what are you going to do? I mean, if we say we assign a chief judge and that's it, and you've got your photo finish company. Well, if they can't give you any results, no one's really going to blame the one judge on the stand for not being able to judge 100 deep into a field. And it's just going to be one of those things. Sorry, we have no results today because, and that's could be a way we go. And it's something we're actively thinking about right now. But right now, we still have this worst case scenario. We got to load the stage up with lots of people because the camera might fail. And yes, it might. But if it does, over the course of a race director's career, how many dollars does he save by not assuming it's going to fail versus the pain of the every once in a while it fails and you've got to go admit to the riders that you have no results? So that's kind of the philosophical question. Is it time to develop a new grid from a different perspective? From a perspective of what really would happen in a more perfect world where you had the technology and it worked, and come up with a reasonable number of officials for that. Should the grid start, this is kind of what it is right now, the grid starts high and sort of has built in where the race director can try to whittle away at the number of officials assigned based on certain things, like I've got the photo finish and the chips, I don't need that many judges. It's a short day, I don't need that many motors, and whittle it down. That's one way. Or should we redo the grid and have it be starting low and let the administrators out there try and tell the race director why that's an insufficient number for your race? It subtly changes the power structure, going on there. That's also something we're thinking about. Another thing we're thinking about, how do we improve the communication between the LA, the race directors, the RTC, and the NTC? And we've got some gaps there that we are trying to address, and mainly a timing kind of thing. By adding an extra layer in there, it, of course, is going to slow everything down. And sometimes that doesn't work so well. Streamlining the process is something, we want to do. And the big question, how do we balance, losing permitted races, which we don't want to do? We would love every race in the country to permit with us all the time. Of course we would. Versus, having what we as officials might think is the right number of officials, which constantly seems to be creeping upward. And national championships that we used to run with 8, we probably run with, 12 to 13 now. Some of that's because of rule changes. We started measuring bikes on Masters. Well, that meant you needed more officials at a Masters championship than you used to. But there just kind of is that trend. Officials always want more officials. Who wouldn't? Makes your life easier. You don't have to do as much and get things done better. But sitting there looking at the whole sport over all disciplines, that's a question that we're trying to struggle with. Okay, I'm supposed to have about 15 minutes left, but before I go on to continuing ed, I would like to field a couple questions if we have any on that topic before I go into another topic. I think I saw Jim's hand first.
I think there's a problem in assuming that technology is going to work. We have several examples at the local level where during a time trial, we have had absolutely no results from chip timing, or at least at maximum 35% accuracy. And to assume that we're not going to have officials there because the time trial is using chip timing would be really silly.
Okay, well, that is certainly one of the perspectives, and one that we currently, because these models are based on that perspective.
Yep. To go to the mountain biking, one of the ways we've addressed in Texas the whole issue of how many officials to have at a mountain bike race, we generally have one assigned official, but all of our timing crew are all actually licensed officials. So they understand the official's perspective. And that's sort of a way to sort of balance
Okay. And then who's making that decision?
The promoters organization basically has, that's the way it's grown up.
Okay. But they're hiring that company. Are they hiring that company because of who those people are, or it just happens to be that company has officials?
Sort of a combination. The company has grown up with our organization, with our promoters organization, and they have gone out and gotten officials licenses as it's happened. But they didn't start as officials, but they realized that would be a good thing for them to get that perspective, and they all actually now work the road and everything as well. So I think that really gives the timing company a good perspective of what's going on and can help balance out these points of view.
Sure, thanks. I know Kinnan had her hand up almost simultaneously with Jim, but we'll go with Stephen because he's got the mic.
I'll try to keep it short, although it might just be a longer discussion. But as you're thinking about risk acceptance, going back to those questions that you say we were discussing, the other piece that you have to think about there, I think, is input would be, how does that change the quality of the race and the consistency of the race that we want the race directors to put out as a sanctioned race or set of races? So in a sense, you need the race director perhaps taking it to the level of they have to actually communicate. Here's the situation with this race, in their flyer. We will not have officials. We will, if we don't get results, too bad. And you have to include that in your risk acceptance, I guess, because that's ultimately who your customer is.
Okay.
So how much of this grid is insurance driven? One official per event on the road, is that insurance driven, or is it driven because we need officials on, or both?
No, none of the grid is driven by anything coming from insurance. I mean, up to the point, of course, where we start noting a lot more accidents and a lot more lawsuits based on something. But no, this was, it didn't start with insurance. This all was from an attempt to create some guidelines for everyone for the assignment of officials, and that would be balanced and fair to the race directors and all the officials involved, and get races that were staffed correctly, but not overstaffed or not understaffed. That's where it came from. But it was a product of deliberations between staff and the technical commission and a lot of other stakeholders that helped put the initial drafts together. And we've been tinkering with it. And I've said all along, if we have the numbers wrong, we'll fix them. And we have made some changes over the last year, several of them, when it just looked like the numbers really weren't realistic, even for those scenarios that we had them.
When there's an error in results and the race director is responsible for that, who's responsible for fixing the errors?
Tom is. Tom's pointing at
We have a brand new rule in our rule book, 1.0, that addresses that very topic. USA Cycling, after 24 hours after the race is completed, it is then up to the purview of USA Cycling to change those results if that request is made within 30 days of the event.
Okay. Mike?
If we're going to be using companies to provide us with our results in place of officials, is there any consideration of whether or not those companies will be permitted, whether they'll be licensed in some way so that they have at least what we consider the minimum requirement of equipment and quality of the results that they can produce?
Well, I know for a fact that question has come up, in staff meetings as we look at a lot having to do with like our race director certification program. A lot can be accomplished by education, but we have at least brought up the subject of, well, if we're going to say, that we're going to use this type of technology, then are we going to certify the technology companies and go, well, yeah, if you got, fill in the blank group, then great. If you want to tell us that you're going to have this group that we've never heard of, maybe not so great. That's certainly something that's on the table. We've not made any decisions along those lines. I'm just rolling out some of the concepts that are currently being discussed as we try and draw a balance that is good for all our stakeholders, and not just one set. Yep.
Would it be possible, part of the permitting process, for the race director to say, this is what I think based on, and then the permit coordinator for the LA looking at that in connection with the officials coordinator?
That would certainly be possible. I'm sure that right now the flow of information is many and varied across all the LAs and with the way permits are done and that whole thing. That would be certainly nothing wrong with the initial requests coming from the race director as far as I'm concerned. But at some point, I think there's got to be somebody that's the administrator at some level that ultimately has the say for a variety of reasons. Somebody has to take responsibility for the fact that these officials were assigned on this day. I feel more comfortable with that being someone that's an LA administrator when that system's in place, or the regional coordinator, or somebody else other than a race director just sort of running around hiring people and doing it that way. But that the more communication we get with the race director's input is kind of what we're looking for. And so I hope so that we get to that point. Take a couple more and then kind of move on to my next one.
I guess I'm on. So just a comment back to the timing. Anything that we can do to remove ourselves from the outcome of a timing company's ability to score. Having worked with timing company and stuff, it's like it's the race director's prerogative if he wants to pay $3,000 to the timing company, as opposed to somebody coming up and saying, I can do it for $400. And we've all seen the quality that, and it's the race director's decision, but we always seem to get caught in the middle of it. Anything we can do to remove us from that race director's decision, I think is a good plus.
Well, I don't see why the officials would ever be involved in the race director's decision on which company to hire, or even if they did, other than question the chief referee's questions to the race director well before the race. But how are you planning on handling results? And if they say, well, we've hired X company, then you sigh with relief. You know everything's going to go well. Or he says, well, we've hired this company, and you're like, oh God, I work with them every week, and they couldn't score their way out of a paper bag, and their camera never works. But you are essentially removed from that decision-making process because you're not the race director, and it's not your job to try and be part of that decision. How far removed officials end up being as these trends continue with more and more technology still is to be seen. Whether we ultimately would be removed from even the implication that we were responsible for generating the results, And of course, if I said tomorrow, oh, by the way, everybody, officials are not responsible for results, it's the race director's job now, how long will it be before the riders and everybody actually get that? Now, of course, they're going to look to the blue shirts they've always looked to for a good period of time. And so if we went that route, and someday we may get there, I'm not saying we are, and I'm not even saying we're taking the first step, this year or whatever, but if that is a trend, and I'm seeing it more and more, and that's where we're asking the question. The technology has gotten so much better than it ever was before that you got a lot of confidence in the timing company. And the reality is, if in a field sprint of 100 people coming by all in less than a second, there are very few judges that can actually do that job other than just get a few places. I mean, yeah, there's some that can score 20 deep into a field, but they're rare individuals. And so, I mean, it's a reality. And as we go more and more to wanting not just, we'd like to lose the mentality of my job is to get the 5 places that are getting medals and I don't care about everybody else. We would like to be able to score everybody. And if we can score everybody with that technology, we can. Without that technology, we can't. And so the technology is good. One more, and then I'm moving on.
Well, you've kind of touched on what my concern is, and the ultimate person that we're responsible to is the bike racers. And if we go ahead and say, well, we're going to rely on technology, how do we answer to them when the technology fails? Do we say that they're relying on technology, and if it fails, do they get their money back? Do you just say, I'm sorry? Because they're going to look to us and say, why aren't you regulating this? So that we at least get results. And the other part of it is the timing companies address, to some extent, what's fair, at least at the finish line, but it doesn't address what's safe, to me. I don't know how you see that.
Well, I see that as two different questions. And if we're talking about finish line technology versus number of judges sitting with legal pads, that's not a safety issue. And when we talk about reducing the number of referees and motors out on the road for financial constraints, that's a safety issue. They're completely separate and unrelated almost. As far as your first question about how do we address that to the riders, the implication would be that we are trusting the timing company to produce the results, which in general is doing a better job than we ever could do without it, because we're able to place everybody, and that's what they like. But if that technology fails, then we're not going to have very good results. But, if riders are going to get their money back if the technology fails, if riders got a refund for every time we didn't place them, race directors would never have any entry fees because that would happen far too frequently. Okay, I'm going to try and rip through continuing ed, which actually is a reasonable short topic. So we are, this year, it was supposed to be last year, but we had some really bad technical problems. And I can't even blame it on Cyclocross Worlds, which has been my excuse for a lot of things lately. But what we want to do is we want to start adding a continuing education policy to make sure that officials are basically current at a very minimum. So the kind of minimum level, active officials are up to speed on USA cycling rules, policies, and procedures. We want to enhance officiating skills within our Corps of Officials. We'd like to see uniformity in the application of rules, policies, and procedures, and increase the level of professionalism, which you all know because that's been one of our driving points for a long time. What we're looking at, very simply, is starting, basically right now you're in the year of continuing education opportunities that you should be thinking about. Next year, if you go to renew, you're actually going to have to let us know how you met what is the fairly minimal continuing education standard right now, and that standard is that you need to have taken the yearly seminar on new rules, procedures, and policies. That might be what many LAs do, is they have that exact program. They'll have an annual seminar, all their officials come and they discuss the new rules. Maybe it's not a separate thing, but maybe they come and discuss lots of things, but among that they have a new rules component of it. That would serve to meet that requirement. Maybe you don't have that or you couldn't make it. If you're a renewing official and you're unable to attend, then we have a new rules seminar or webinar offered online. Tom and I essentially did that last week. We were able to do that. So that's there. It's posted. If you didn't have a new rules seminar yet, this year, you would be able to go online and view that. That would serve as your continuing ed opportunity and requirement, for the year. And that's for all renewing officials. So if someone's brand new this year, and next year they decided they want to do it, which I'll talk about later when I talk about USAC by the numbers, they would have to demonstrate that. Now, the next year, it's going to get slightly more complicated. And at this point, we're going to say, beginning in 2015, you're going to have to do the first one anyway. So all officials are going to have to do the new rules. Level B and higher officials are also going to have to complete an additional hour of continuing ed. Our goal, of course, here is to have so many continuing ed opportunities, including webinars and taped seminars like this one that a person could access, that hopefully for anyone level B or higher, that's going to be a slam dunk because we got a lot of buy-in from somebody that's already a level B. If you went through all those modules to become a level B, I mean, this is nothing. You know, this would be like 10 minutes of one of your modules, basically. But we want to see people trying to better themselves and keep abreast and get new information. There's lots of ways to do it. Beginning in 2016, in addition to the New Rules seminar, which is going to be a constant for everyone all the time, you're going to have to do 3 additional hours of continuing education. Again, for anyone that takes this seriously and as a profession, hopefully that's not overly burdensome. But it would be enough to keep people, trying to learn new things and better their skills. So what's going to count? Annual officiating seminars that you might have locally, including New Rules, certainly is going to count. There might be other seminars that you could take. Upgrade clinics, we're including upgrade. If you've put in the effort, whether it's by a module system or going to like the level A clinic or the NatCom course or something like that, that certainly is going to count. There's an awful lot of education that happens there. The upgrade modules are going to count. Right now we have, we've just almost gotten done completely redoing the level B road modules. We are in the process of creating track modules. We have a draft of level A mountain bike modules. We just haven't released them yet. They're undergoing a final tweaking. But any of those, if you upgraded using those methods, that would count as continuing ed. Very specific seminars. We just had one in Northern California. It was one of the most well-attended and successful seminars I've seen in years. And it was a specific caravan management seminar that Ed Daly and Carla Geyer put on in NorCal. And I've gotten so much good feedback about that I was really tempted to take credit for it. But unfortunately, I had nothing to do with it. It wasn't even my idea. But NorCal requested that seminar, and I got the instructors. That was about it. And I every week get plenty of emails from attendees about that's like the best thing they've ever gone to. Didn't want to do that. We have things like race secretary seminars every once in a while, starter seminars. But there's lots of specific ones that we can put together. Some of them are live. Some of them, as we start using this technology more, might be more and more presentations are done up here. Some sorts of presentations that works really well for. Others it doesn't. Depends on the nature of the interaction you have to make it a useful experience. Already mentioned webinars. Archive stream presentations like this summit, for example. Every one of these sessions will be a link you'll be able to click on, and someone that was unfortunate enough not to be here would be able to actually share this experience with us. Attendance at this summit. And other officiating related events that might not have anything to do with cycling even. This summer, I think it's the end of July, National Association of Sports Officials has their annual summit. Happens to be in Grand Rapids, Michigan. I plan on going to that. And there's probably other things, whether in your professional life or just because you're interested in officiating, you have other educational opportunities. Right now, nothing is off the table, or hardly anything is off the table. We also are looking as part of this at having at least an hour of the 3 be what we call certified self-study. So maybe there isn't a seminar for you to go to, but there's something else that interests you. Maybe you read The Psychology of Officiating or something like that, that has no seminar basis to it, but is an educational opportunity because you chose to do that. So all these things are on the table right now. We have certain details we're trying to work out. One is what is the relative value of some of the different products we might have? So one of the things I can tell you is that the New Rules seminar, that's a yearly thing. Good for a year, basically. The way we're going to look at it is when you renew, and some of that's a timing issue, but when you renew your license, you'll be expected to have taken a New Rules seminar, which was the most recent one offered. So if you were, say, to renew on December 1, which you can actually do because we start selling our licenses for the following year on December 1, if you renewed on December 1, we're going to be looking to see that you took the most recent rules seminar. Well, the earliest I will ever have the new rules seminar is going to be early January, so that wouldn't have been available yet. Your LA might not have had their new rules seminar yet. We might not have published the rule book yet. But so the previous one would count. But if you renewed your license in April, well, the new rules webinar is out. Your LA probably already had its version of it. It would be the most recent one that was going to count. But those are good for that year's CE credit for that one that you need. The summit, good news for you guys. I mean, if you're willing to give me 2 days of your weekend, and in many cases spend on a hotel and airline, that's going to be good for 2 years. So the minute we record that you've done this, you basically get into a pool of people that you're done with your CE credit for the next 2 years. And if you come again in 2 years, then you've satisfied it again. And this is way over satisfying your continuing education, and we recognize that. How are we going to track it? Okay, well, that's just really kind of an IT question, which I made major headway yesterday on this IT question because the appropriate bribes have been given to the appropriate people. The reporting is going to be some kind of self-reporting, essentially. There are 1,700 of you in the country. Of course, if I look at the Bs and up, it probably whittles it down to 400 or 500. But I don't have time to read 500 emails explaining to me, how you satisfied this requirement. So we're going to have to develop some way for you to report it and it to get credit into our system. The way the system generally works, and those of you in motor refs know this, when you go to renew your license, it gets pended until you do a particular thing. If you're a motor ref, it's going and have your motor vehicle record checked. And then we get an email that says, yeah, you're clear, and we unpend it. Well, it's going to be similar for the continuing ed. You're going to try and renew your license, and it's not going to be automatic. Something's going to happen. That something is probably going to be, you get an email telling you, you need to satisfy continuing ed, if you're one that does, anyway, at that point. And then you'll have to fill something out, a drop-down menu, something like that, and we'll have some pre-selected things in there, like I listened to the 2013 rules webinar, or I took the 2013 officials summit, or several others that we know exist that we put in there. Or it might be other. And if it's other, then you're going to fill that out, and then I might get an email, but that's going to way cut down the number of emails I'm going to get, because most of you are going to take the new rules and you're going to do some other things that we have in there. And it looks like it's very doable to make it not only painless for you, but painless for me too. But that's the basic idea, is that your renewal is tied to compliance with the requirement for continuing education. And yeah, there'll be some growing pains in there, but hopefully it won't be too bad. And I'm going to be working with the IT department starting next week on exactly how to make this happen. We're looking at what we actually should and can develop using this facility. We've got all kinds of capabilities. Using webinars off of a different system, we can do things. And also looking at what's our realistic timeline for accomplishing this. In a perfect world, I'd like to have a seminar in here every month. Whether I have the time to do it, or Tom has the time to do it, or we can bring other people in and have them do that. But we'd like to have lots of opportunities. Don't want anyone to ever say, I couldn't renew my license because there were no opportunities. That's not where we're going with this. So it's my job to make sure you all have the opportunities to get this done in a fairly painless way. That is all I have. Are there any questions on that before we break for lunch? Going once, going twice. Everyone's hungry. Okay. Oh, there's one.
I don't have a question so much as a comment, information that was brought up at the NTC when we were discussing this. So say you're a Category C official and you love being a Category C official and you have no more desire to go up the ranks and all that kind of thing. So, and I'm sure there's a couple of you sitting here. But the barest minimum that you'll ever have to do is, the barest minimum that you'll ever have to do is to attend that annual seminar, the rules seminar. That used to be in the rule book until not too many years ago.
Some idiot took that out of the rule book 8 years ago, and don't know why.
So,
Not technically, no.
right, so that's all you're ever going to need, and, you know, for those officials who like being Cs, that's all you're going to ever need to be.
Okay. Anyone else? I'm hungry. We should go eat now.